concert hall where we quartet players share with the fifth presence, the audience, that's you, the miracle of conversational music. I thought that then we could maybe transport the very enlightened idea that gave birth to string quartet as a genre, a conversation in music, to a similar four-part counterpoint, but with words, as we inhabit nowadays times of musical silence. Through this series, generally hosted by the String Quartet Biennale Amsterdam, we will create another form of string quartet performance. That is, four voices from different quartets, all of them, of course, groups that are linked to the Amsterdam Quartet Biennale, will meet every week to discuss and debate about music, about the context of silence we're living, and about the uncertain coming future and the role that string quartet and chamber music can play. And we will do it, we want to do it, as we do it in concerts, through listening, through reacting, and through learning constantly from each other's ideas and gestures. You are, of course, very welcome to post any questions in social media while you listen to us, and we hope we will have time to answer at least some of them. Of course, unfortunately, not all, but as we normally, as quartet players, we are reacting on stage also to the audience. We want also to be reacting here to you. I thought of baptizing this series with the name of Ricercare, which stands for search, for experiment, for invention, for counterpoint. And this is the concept that will lead these meetings, hoping that, like in a good concert, we will exit from this experience being somehow different as we were when we entered it. To open this series, we're privileged to welcome an amazing lineup of guests. We have Jonathan Brown from the Casals Quartet. Hello, Jonathan.
Hello, good evening.
We have John Myerscough from the Doric String Quartet. Hello, John.
Hello.
And Rainer Schmidt from the Hagen Quartet. Hello, Rainer. Rainer, we don't hear you.
Is that
that's
already?
it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, now you can hear me, right?
Yeah, that's
Yes.
it. Perfect.
Hello.
Perfect. Hello. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you to the three of you for being here in this first experience. And I would like to start this little chat by just, asking you, how are you? How are you spending these days? And yeah, how is being in a lockdown? How is being away from your quartet, away from stages, from performance? Is this triggering any kind of special creativity, any special relation with music, with playing, with practicing? Who wants to start?
I'm very happy to launch. I think Ryan has got a problem with his sound things. I'm not sure.
Can we hear you, Rainer?
I don't think he can hear us.
Okay, so maybe would you start talking, John, and then we'll try to fix it somehow.
Oh, first of all, Cibrán, thank you so much for asking me here and giving me something to sort of raise the adrenaline for the first time in quite a few months. It's obviously incredibly strange, an unknown time, and personally, I've obviously massively missed playing concerts, working with my colleagues, the rehearsal process, the way one is just surrounded by music, and your head, your body is just sort of living with what happens in the quartet room. And but it's been a nice time to sort of try and reflect and try and make use of some of this space that we have never experienced before. And for me, on a practical level, I've been practicing a little bit and enjoying actually having a daily routine, so you can actually practice at pretty much the same time every day, and building what I do through that, but also trying to have a little bit of a time away from music. I find it quite painful often to listen to music and to be reminded of what we're not able to do at the moment. So it's a sort of weird combination, mix of things, but generally trying to stay positive.
Not easy always. Jonathan?
Well, we were, with the quartet, we were going full steam ahead until the day that the confinement started. 24 hours before the lockdown in Spain, we were rehearsing, hoping to fly the next morning to play a concert the next evening. And I also agree with John. For me, there's a lot of sadness in missing all of these experiences. We'd look forward to them and we'd prepared for them. And, you know, I at least had imagined how they would be and how it would be to arrive in these different halls and see friends and meet new friends. So I've spoken with other people who've also done the same thing. I haven't deleted any of the concerts or the travel plans from my calendar. So every day I'm reminded of what I could have or should have been doing, who knows. So in that sense, it's been hard. It's not easy. On the other hand, I've had an unprecedented amount of time with my family, which has been lovely. And I think this confinement has forced us to think about our priorities and why we live the way we do. As John mentioned, a shot of adrenaline. In the hour before this chat, I had to run a few errands at stores that are finally open. And I realized for the first time in over 2 months, I was in a hurry. I had to run from store to store and run home. And I'm almost embarrassed to admit that I loved it. I was happy to feel this stress of being in a rush. And so now I think it's maybe a good thing to think about why that is, if it's necessary for us to feel this way, and what are the positive things we can take from having not moved for over 2 months.
What about you, Rainer? How's the feeling? What's your relation with music also these days?
Cibrán, I cannot hear you for some reason.
You cannot hear us. Okay, that's a problem.
I could hear John and I could hear Jonathan. I cannot hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay.
Yes, we all can hear you. And can you guys can hear me?
Now I can. Okay.
Now you can?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. No, I was wondering, how are you dealing with this moment, and what's your relation with music also these days?
When it comes strictly to music and musical life, I would say the biggest difference was how I would be dealing with the students. Of course, like Jonathan and John, we had to, all of our concerts were cancelled. Quite a few, and it will be like this until the end of the summer, I believe. Yeah? Maybe something will be possible in Austria from July on and in August, but so far it seems to be the only country where it seems to be maybe possible for us to play a concert with 250 people or whatever. I can very much relate to what Jonathan said about the family. I can very much relate to what John said about the practicing, even though that was not my thing to deal. But it was rather to think about what can we do to make this time not completely wasted for the students. Yeah, and I felt that after a while, this online lessons one-to-one with the microphone, this is really limited, really limited. You can detect something from looking through the camera, but it was more about what can we do together, which usually we don't have time for things, discovering together other kinds of music. That was what I felt in a musical sense.
I think that for me it's been very interesting to see also how people has started relating with online performing, and how there's been kind of a boom of artists of all possible fields and levels, and showing and sharing their love for music online, up to a certain point that I myself have felt a little bit like there was too much noise somehow at a certain point, and that somehow these were extra out of the ordinary times, and we needed to do something that would be out of the ordinary, which is not actually playing. How do you feel about all this incredible amount of playing and free giving of contents that is coming out from many performers, and also some chamber music groups and quartets?
Well, we have quite a sort of strange situation where we can't perform in public, yet there's been an explosion of relatively live things available to consume. So there's been a sort of shift as to what we can hear and experience, and that's quite difficult to work out where the comfortable middle ground of that is. And I mean, I completely understand the desire when everything was cancelled and we suddenly realized nothing is going to happen until August or whenever it may be, and to the desire to sort of get stuff out there and share things. And but maybe there's a sort of been a peak of that, and we're now seeing the kind of slope down from that as people kind of a bit after that initial outburst are thinking a little bit more about what the value of that is. Who is it bringing pleasure to? Is it more about an expression of trying to show that you can still do something, or is it really to be consumed and by a third party? And particularly for us as chamber musicians, it's quite a strange thing, because we can't make music with anyone else unless we sort of live with a partner who does that or whatever. But that's really, really difficult thing to navigate.
Because, for example, we talk as always, and we work as quartet players with the fact of, you know, the room itself, the space between ourselves, the looks, the breathings, all these things are something. Even the physical gestures somehow are an essential part of the musical intuition to form and shape a phrase, and therefore to be eloquent in one way or another. Do you think it is possible somehow that, for example, now that many festivals are thinking, you know, let's do online concerts, you know, without audience, and let's stream them? Do you think that somehow the power of eloquence and of communication that a string quartet has can be given through a screen or in an online performance?
I would say, both in reference to the homemade, so to speak, recordings of performances, as well as the quote-unquote professional performances that halls are now trying to organize. I think for me, they confirm two phenomena, both of which are very positive. The first is that I think people feel a real need to share this music. We as musicians, it's not just a job, it's something that we feel we need to share with other people, and I think that's very positive. And I think people also feel a need to listen to live music. I think people realize they want to listen to something. So I think in that sense, this boom, as you say, is very positive. On the other hand, and the second point I wanted to make, at least for me personally, I think for me it confirms the necessity of live performance in a hall together, of course, when it's safe enough to do so. I love listening to especially old recordings, and I found all sorts of interesting things on YouTube, but for me, there's no substitute for being in the same physical space, hearing something, sharing their experience together as an audience. And I hope that coming out of this confinement and going forward, people will appreciate more and more what live performance means. That no technology, no DVD, there's nothing that can really substitute for it in the end. Although I do see the impulse to try as something very positive.
Yeah, I wanted to add maybe following. When we go to a concert, and let's take maybe a concert with our core repertoire, which let's say starts with the Age of Enlightenment, and let's say for now, just the end of the 19th century. then of course what we hear in a performance, let's say a Mozart quartet or a Haydn quartet, is information which is incredibly inspiring for also the left part of our brain. There's so much messaging, there's so much semantics, there's so much symbolism, which makes going to a concert of this kind of master music so worthy and wonderful. But then probably there is something so much more basic. It is those vibrations which we feel, and we feel the overtones together, and we feel the rhythms together. But then it's just gone. It's a sound, and it is just there for 1 second, and the next second it's gone. And we can never own it. It's nothing to be ever owned. Mm. And so maybe subconsciously or consciously, this is something I think which is very strong, which we all feel together. And sorry, Cibrán, just since I believe that that the music of this, our core repertoire, is meant to bring out the better sides in us as people, I think there is something in the concert hall which can create this empathy for each other. And I believe a screen can never do the same.
And what about in that case? Because that's what you were talking is something. I always think of this famous sentence by Heraclitus, that says that everything flows, nothing stays the same. And music is in itself, the main expression of time. Somehow exists only in time, as you were suggesting somehow, Rainer. What do we do then when we normally record, and why we? What's the sense of actually record? Like recording, fixing something in time is like kicking Heraclitus in his very soul. Somehow, how what's the sense of doing it, and is it, if there is any sense on recording, is there also that sense could be extrapolated to online and streaming, because somehow it's going to be a necessity, at least until we know that we can move around safely as we used to do before as quartet players and musicians. How do you feel about this? Do you play, for example, different for a microphone or than what you play for an audience? Does interpretation change for you when you know that the listener is not in the same space, sharing the same air that you are, and therefore cannot leave out of these things that you were mentioning?
Is it really interesting, Cibrán, because I think when we record, we really try and play as if there's an audience there, and sometimes sorry, right?
Same for us. Sorry.
Yeah, and I think, and we all are sort of magicians somehow. We can conjure up the sensation of an audience being there, and have that danger and that risk taking. And we actually find it incredibly liberating to be in the studio and have this luxury audio equipment that you can listen to yourself and criticize but use it as an opportunity to push and see what you can do but always just knowing that it's just on that day. And you're doing that, and it's a real treat, especially these days. I mean, like this decade or this century, to be able to record is such a luxury, given where that industry has gone, and to be able to save something, even if it's just a glimpse of what you could do, I think is beautiful. How to translate that to an online thing? I think you just would hope that when we're playing to a camera and a microphone in the next months, that we try and recreate that. And it wasn't so long ago that we played to audiences, so we can still remember that feeling. But having that danger and maybe the slight element of liveness to these online things can allow us to throw away a little bit our worries about perfection and correctness or these dangerous things, and just actually throw something out and know that people might be a bit more grateful for it, a bit less ready to criticize, and a bit more open to accept and think and contemplate what we're saying about these pieces?
This question reminds me of something that happened when I was a student. I was in a course on 20th century music, and there's a lecture on John Cage. And so the teacher explained various pieces of John Cage's, and he talked about this piece. I think that there were maybe a series of pieces, I can't remember, but these with different radios. So there were 3 or 4 radios on stage, and the radios were the instruments, the equivalent of the string quartet, and the performer had then to manipulate the dials, and whatever music or talk happened to come out of those radios in that moment is the piece, and that's how it was composed. And so the teacher talked about this and then played a recording of this piece, and because somebody had gone to a recording studio with his or her 4 radios, and manipulated the dials and made a record of this. And a friend of mine raised her hand and said, she was a violinist, and she said, but why would you record this piece? Why would you do this? And he said, and why do you record Beethoven's 7th Symphony? And of course, there are aesthetic, philosophical differences, but on a certain level, however many years later, I still don't have a really good answer. In that, as much as I appreciate recordings and I love the process of recording and learning from it, in the end, I still believe that the element of live performance is irreplaceable. And for me personally, recordings are a way to hear live performances from the past of musicians whom I never had the chance to hear, and maybe a gateway into another way of looking at music. But they're, I would say, part of a process rather than a goal or an end in and of themselves.
And kind of, for example, creative, because we talk so much and we are aware that part of the strength of a chamber music group, and especially string quartet, is the fact of really to listen to a string quartet is the fact of participating in this debate that we're doing right now, to really leaving the exchange of the conversational part of it. Whereas, for example, when one is watching an opera, I mean, there's a play, there's something which is more scenic. Even with a symphony orchestra, there's kind of a staging which is bigger than the individual somehow, and sound and the musical discourse has another interest somehow. How somehow can we apply this to should we use, like, from now on, consider when we are having concerts with no audience, using the cameras creatively, or would that bother the music? How can you actually be part of this ether, if you can say it, no, this air that is there and is hard to exist? Could you substitute it somehow, or do you think even our rhetorical eloquence, our way of performing, should somehow be a little bit more distinct, a little bit more? Should we do something, or should we never do something? I mean, what's your? It's hard, I know, but I mean, it's somehow, I feel that it's our future now somehow to try to still create a communication act with the audience. How do we manage it in this new concept of?
Well, I'll just say as concisely as possible. I personally don't. One element of modern filming of classical music, which I don't enjoy, is the insatiable need to move the camera every 5 seconds, and the idea that because it affects how we hear things. And what's interesting to me, for example, or what's most interesting to me is the interaction between the voices. And so when, through the use of camera, as brilliant as it can be, the photography tries to direct us to listen to one voice or another voice, when what's interesting to me is the interaction of the voices. I think that's relatively dangerous. So I think there are uses of cameras that could facilitate the feeling of being in a concert hall. My preference would be to, certainly in the case of a string quartet, maintain as much of the interaction between the 4 voices as possible. and try to get away from the idea of this is his solo, that's her solo, this is her moment, this is. I'm sort of allergic to that category, but I'm sort of fanatical in this.
Do you guys agree, or do you see it somehow different?
No, John, please.
No, after you.
No, I understand this point, of course. I was a little bit afraid, Cibrán, and of course this is not a criticism, but it is rather I want to laud you that everything you are attempting to do, and also the last question about the recording industry and what it means, is worth a 2-hour webinar all by itself. So everything we speak about is rather complex. But if I may, going into a different direction, and there is something about string quartet which is also true, I guess, about piano trio and other forms of chamber music. But maybe with the string quartet, it is the best example is those different layers of communication. Yeah, I try to make it quick. The composer writes ideas, feelings with black dots on white papers. That's the first layer of communication. Then we read this and let this paper communicate to us. Then, as a string quartet, we have to communicate with each other what actually it meant, what we see, what the composer communicated to a white piece of paper. And then we have to do that, communicate that to the audience. And I don't think that we always have to agree what we see. But at the moment when we go on stage, I think it is better if you respect us at least a little bit and don't think that the others are completely wrong. But we have to accept that that the communication, what we see on the paper, might not always be the same. And maybe it's not such a bad thing to say, because some people believe that we always agree. We don't. We don't necessarily completely agree. But I think it is very important that then, when we go on stage, respect each other enough to give the space for everybody. That is very important. And once we accept that this is what in the end is, besides those physical things, which I was even speaking about, the sound waves and the rhythm, but it is for people who try to come to terms with each other what 2 layers of communication meant to them, and then communicating it to other people. That is very strong. But as long as the audience doesn't understand that it is in the moment, and that it is very fragile, and that it is actually extremely human, or once we understand that we are always in that way, even we go on stage in a way, searching for a truth at this moment. When we have that as a basis, then I think we can talk about many other things.
Yeah, and in that sense, I wanted to ask you, because what you're proposing somehow it's, and we know we all agree somehow, is that in the end, you know, String Quartet is proposing a kind of a conversation or a relation, which is a metaphor of a certain way of behaving socially in society. Do you think that in these times of so much noise and so much incredibly bold statements from many people, you know, that states that things are either black or white, you know, in a very unnuanced way, in the sense that you were saying that we could be talking for specific aspects of this conversation for hours, as you were saying, Rainer. Do you think that somehow String Quartet is more necessary than ever somehow, or what? Or do you think that the String Quartet can play nowadays and a specific role in, so to say, sharing with the world as a way and of understanding each other and of behaving, of reacting, of respecting socially as citizens, you know, of the world somehow?
I think quartet has always been at least in my humble opinion, the model for all conversation, argument, disagreement across the arts, probably, but definitely in the wider world. And this way we try, I think all of our groups try and play in this way without a leader, without a dominant force within the group, and that is, and it works. Somehow it works, which is remarkable in itself. Whether string quartet is more important now than ever, I think it has probably always, it has always been a very, very valid thing. But maybe, I mean, I'd like to think a little bit at the moment that the intimacy that string quartet can provide is something that maybe can be more highlighted by the experience that we're going through at the moment. I mean, yes, we're all leading intimate lives because we are isolated, but that sense of bringing individuals into the conversation that we have in whatever piece that we're playing, and actually try and cherish and celebrate the small scale of the string quartet. And music has been getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and louder and louder, and shinier and glitzier, and maybe that's one thing that I've always found with quartet friends, that we all share this desire for the very miniature and very, very personal and very quiet. And actually we crave just as much to play in a room in front of 10 people as we do in a hall in front of 1,000 people or whatever. And obviously there are financial pressures, which means that luxury is not always affordable, but that sense of being able to communicate directly to another human being, I think is and to touch by the fragility of what we can do as chamber ensembles. I think that if we can celebrate that somehow, because of this time, or focus on actually the importance of just a one-to-one conversation. We don't have those at the moment in person with someone, and that's what's so unique about the string quartet. Yeah.
So maybe is it for you? You think it's time for the small format to be back? Maybe in this context where we're even thinking of will orchestras be able to play? How many people can we have in the audience? Shouldn't be a moment to reflect upon the importance of using string quartet as this kind of mean to get to more places, to be more democratic in the sense of programming as well, and of creating a cultural scene. What do you think?
I agree with that, because it means more people hear more quartets, which is clearly a positive thing. Yeah, I think it is an opportunity, and how to do it practically is really, really difficult. And you have if you have a socially distanced audience, do you lose that intimacy, or does actually the lack of an audience member next to you mean you can actually focus more on what's happening?
I actually had the good fortune, I suppose, to experience an evening of string quartets, the socially distanced concert. For whatever reason, on March 12th, there was a concert that took place in Barcelona with 3 young quartets, Esme, Arris, and Dudok from Holland. And for whatever reason, the concert wasn't canceled. Every other, I think, was probably one of the last string quartet concerts, certainly in Spain, maybe in Europe, that week before everything shut down. And it was very strange to sit in the audience so separately. But I have to say, there was an appreciation and a concentration and attention in the audience that was unique. And maybe one thing that will come out of this confinement is a certain sense of gratitude that it's possible at all for us that this music was written, and it's at all possible for us to get together and play and listen to music together. And I think on that evening, that's what, being in the audience, that's what I most felt from the other people there that were there. Just gratitude and thankfulness that this was possible. So I think the string quartet and chamber music ensembles in general may have an advantage coming out of this for purely practical reasons. Where fewer people that would be on a stage, where we don't need an audience of 4,000 like at the Metropolitan Opera. I think there are practical advantages, but I hope that when we're able to play, the sense of appreciation will still be there.
Yeah, I was wondering, for example, when you see these efforts now to adapt to this new situation, and like I was wondering, wouldn't it be, instead of wondering how do we manage to play again a huge the Goethe Lieder by Schoenberg, as what wouldn't it be interesting to split these fantastic symphony orchestras into a bazillion small string quartets that would play along the cultural scene of their own cities, you know, and I mean string quartets or wind quintets and brass quintets or something like that. So to use the power of chamber music, which becomes already, you know, accessible in terms of sanitary regulations, to access and be more, you know, access the audience and bring music in the end to people. Do you think this is going to happen? Because I remember that in the last crisis, when the money was gone, the first thing that big festivals did was, you know, shut chamber music cycles, instead of, you know, considering the big things, which are clearly much more expensive somehow. And with the money that somehow a big conductor gets, you can program like 15 string quartets, you know. Do you think these ideas will now, by this health regulations or sanitary regulations, will become a necessity, or you think this is not going to happen anyway? You know?
I don't think it's going to happen. I wish everything you said sounded absolutely wonderful. We almost made a promise here, and I will keep to that, not to become political. But no, and I try as much not to become. But in a time where it seems to be really a good idea to leave your message not to 100 people, but to go to a stadium and talk to 20,000, I think that the Goethe Lieder have a good chance. And more than a Haydn quartet. Yeah, but because with the Haydn quartet, there is so much less chance that you can flatter people, that you can make them listen to something. Nothing wrong with the Goethe Lieder. It's extremely beautiful music. Yeah, don't misunderstand me. But it is speaking to a very different set of instincts than a string quartet. And right now, but not only right now, but for, I would say, the last 50 years and more, people wanted to hear this kind of message at least as much as a message which we have to be much more careful to find in the Haydn quartet.
Definitely. And are you thinking, for example, of for the future with your own quartets? I mean, I guess you've been talking about the future and everything. Are you thinking, for example, that will this have an impact somehow in the way, for example, you program, like maybe shorter concerts, one gesture concerts, so to say, instead of big long concerts with two halves, which have, do we need somehow to, or not only because of this crisis, but thanks to this crisis that we're starting to think about things, should we think about a different way of programming, a different way of relating, you know, trying to keep being, you know, stepping behind the music always, but, you know, a way to bring the music better to audiences in this way? Do you think there are tools that we can manage somehow, also in interpretation?
Well, I think that, sorry, just very quickly, the shorter programs, I think this, in our case, it already has happened, at least in the first concerts we're supposed to play at the end of August. They've asked us to reduce the program to an hour length. I'm not quite sure why they decided, but I think that's already happening. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I also love concerts that are 2 pieces on the first half and 1 long piece on the second half. That's wonderful. But I think the idea of constructing a 1-hour journey, so to speak, with different pieces would be a very good exercise for all of us. So I don't see that as a bad thing necessarily.
John,
Yes.
please allow me to take a certain burden off your shoulder so that you wouldn't have to say the thing again. But what I want to say is there are financial pressures.
Mm-hmm.
We cannot be just talking about what we want. There are financial pressures.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
True, but somehow I think there's also, isn't there a way of creativity that also presenters should, stimulate, and we could help them somehow with ideas, somehow to find ways to somehow make evident that with chamber music, with a small format, they can arrive to decentralize somehow the performances and arrive to an equal amount of people, but doing it differently somehow. No, should like be as quartet players more involved in with this kind of situation, because I think that sometimes don't you feel that we're somehow too close in our little universe of music. We want to communicate, but we don't reflect upon the ways of how can we actually do it, because of those financial pressures that you talk, and because of those things. Are you active in this way, or you think we should, or that's something that doesn't?
No, go for it, Rainer.
No, just come to back to this point when I said financial pressure, I want to add the following. I cannot imagine that because of this crisis, something very fundamental is changing. All 4 of us, of course, are sharing that a big part of the audience likes to hear a certain amount of music and certain famous pieces. So we have to always find a way that we give into what the audience wants to hear, but at the same time, maybe that we feel there's a certain integrity, artistic integrity, that we would like to present some other music which is dear to ourselves and stuff. But again, there's a reason also why many people like to hear the same thing, maybe even over and over again, because they can relate already to that. And it is very, very important to them to be able to relate to something, and not to be, it's not even to be not challenged, but it is in the end, it is also a very beautiful thing. So I just wanted to mention that, sorry, John, because it is also, this is a financial pressure, what I'm talking about. A presenter must present something where the people will come to.
I also just with that, these pieces that we're often asked to play are often also, you could say, the best pieces. I mean, these famous pieces like Schubert, Death and the Maiden, for example. I mean, there's a reason why it's famous, and that's kind of great to play these things. And I suppose we need to be able to gauge with an audience whether an audience is wanting music to be, they're wanting to experience something familiar, but wanting to experience that live. So their favorite piece, they want to hear that live. And there's always a balance, I suppose, in programming with combining what people would like to hear and feel okay about, so they're going to go to the concert, and also throwing something at them that they might not like. I mean, we've experimented a little bit changing the order of the standard order of programs and putting the Haydn into the second half, and people find that revelatory. So maybe even simple things like that, start with your Bartók quartet and then play your Haydn, and it really, people respond to just these tiny little changes I mean, you're not changing much, and we experience differently, of course, as performers.
Yeah, because somehow, I mean, I feel also, I don't know what you guys think, but I think somehow people, you know, there's a certain inertia, you know, that makes things work the way they work, but the inertia ends up, you know, slowing down up to stopping, you know. So you need to be somehow introducing all the time things like what John is proposing, somehow to keep give an extra push in another direction. And sometimes I think this might be revelatory somehow for many listeners. I think we're starting somehow to close the half, you know, we've been here 46 minutes, we could be here like for ages, but I want to throw at you some questions that some people have proposed. One of them, for example, is, what do you miss the most these days when you are in the lockdown? Is there anything specific? I guess the question has to do with music somehow.
For me, I miss the rehearsal process. I miss the engagement with the music, with the people who I cherish more than most, and having that dialogue and that discussion and that pushing and pulling and the tension and the trying to find a new path through what we're doing and grappling with these things. That's the luxury of a string quartet, I suppose. Is that it's the unlimited rehearsal, and I miss that intensively. Actually, it's really yeah, that hurts.
What about you guys? Rainer, Jonathan, anything?
Sure. I mean, for me, as much as I appreciate the time at home, I miss the travel, the excitement of going to different places and seeing friends and meeting new people and the experience of being in different places. I love that. On a musical level, I also miss the rehearsals, but for me, there's a
but not so much.
Maybe not so much as John, but
I don't miss them that much. I'm just acting up.
No, of course, I also miss that. But I think in concert, what Rainer was describing before with these different levels of communication, there's a connection that we have to audience members, to each other, to the other three members of the quartet, to our own inspiration, wherever that comes from, that mostly I'm only able to experience in concerts, or if not in concerts, teaching, but teaching in the same room with one or four other people. So the kind of inspiration and heightened connection and heightened sense of being alive that comes from live performance or live teaching, which I suppose it was another chapter altogether, I don't think can really be substituted for in any way. So that I definitely miss.
You, Rainer, or there's another question which is interesting. Will your quartets somehow feel this time of silence, feel a special lasting effect in this time of silence?
End of June, we will come together because, as I said, so far there's one concert planned in Vienna, which will be different than we usually do. We play twice because the audience has to be much smaller. Yeah, and so we play shorter. Cibrán, the thing is, with our quartet, we did quite regularly. I mean, it only happened 3 or 4 times, but every 6 or 7 years that we took half a year off, and we decided not to play concerts for half a year. So this was planned, I think, for the end of next year. So this seems like it's a forced sabbatical for us. But when we come together end of June, it is not that this will be the first time that we did that for a few months, not to play with each other.
And there's another very interesting question, I think. Will your quartets have any role in helping young string quartets to survive this crisis? I mean, I don't think everyone in this chat, the four of us, are very involved with education for people who do not know. So I think they're committed teachers, but please do share your views about this aspect as the final question of our chat.
Go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, I think it's it's not the happiest question to think about, because I myself feel incredibly fortunate that I'm a little bit beyond that stage and have established a career. And to be back 10, 15 years ago, it must be very, very scary. And I'm really, really sorry that people are having to go through that. But I think my sense is that the musical world is in this together and is a very supportive place, despite what we might sometimes feel. But perhaps this will make it a bigger, a stronger and more supportive community. And perhaps there are a lot more concerts because of the having to do concerts twice in an evening, or however it may work. So there might be more work actually out there. And I just have to pray that the young quartets are going to be able, for very basic reasons, be able to stay together and keep on working, and maybe the suffering, as awful as it is, will foster a greater love for what they do together. How to help them myself. I mean, I'm not sure how to do that apart from keep on encouraging them and keep on. I mean, I'm not a promoter, so I can't do that, but I can keep on supporting groups and encouraging them to go for things and telling important people about them, and that sort of thing will not stop at all. But I think just being a support and being someone who can listen and take help and guide them as the best we can.
Yeah, Jonathan,
Yeah.
we can't hear you, Aina.
I turned off the microphone. I just wanted to say, I said, thank you very much, John. You answered that really beautifully, because it is really nagging, this question. And we are more fortunate, of course, because we have done it for a while, than many of the younger people, and it breaks one's heart in a way.
Of course, I completely agree. And there's hanging over this discussion, as Aina and John mentioned, is this question of financial pressure, which is of course much greater for younger quartets than for older quartets. Certainly, if when we have teaching positions that are established, that's a tremendous help right now. So, of course, that's a sort of elephant in the room that I can't address, the financial pressure. Having said that, I would like to think, or I would like to hope, that there will be something positive for this in younger quartets, in that I think this was our experience as a young quartet, but I think these trends have accelerated in the last 20 years. But I think we all want everything fast, as quickly as possible, as many concerts as possible, as many competitions. We want things fast. And that's natural, and it's a normal instinct. But I don't think string quartets work that way particularly well. I think they need time, an incredible amount of time, to make mistakes, to try things, to learn, to grow, and it simply takes time. And perhaps the silver lining in this, if quartets are able to stay together, which partly will be if quartets are able to survive financially, and hopefully there will be resources for that. Perhaps young quartets at this time will be forced simply to have more time in the same city rehearsing, without doing a million different projects at once. And I think that could be a good thing in the longer term. But that's hope.
So to finish, I would like you to, if it's possible, I would like you to speak out whatever you think, if it's or any idea that you would like. Also, if how are you thinking of, when next time you go on stage, after all this time, maybe Rainer already somehow suggested that for you have been this experience, this space, no? But do you think that music somehow will feel again new because of everything we lived? Also, not only the not playing together, but also everything that is happening around. Do you think this whole situation will have an impact in you when we go back on stage and play again the pieces that we've played many times? Will they feel different? Will we feel different on stage? And yeah, sure. Go ahead.
As I said, until the 30th of June, there will be no concerts in Austria, and the 1st of July is our date. So I can only imagine that the whole expectation toward the atmosphere and the whole, even though it's of course not the normal atmosphere because the people have to social distance. So this will be kind of funny, but I can only imagine that the tension also in a good sense between us, the four of us together, and then when the first sound comes of our instrument, I could almost believe it will make me cry. Yeah? I can only imagine it will be very, very strong.
What is the first piece you'll play?
The Shostakovich number 4.
Uh-huh.
And Beethoven 141. It is not necessarily the happiest music.
We will play, the first thing we have to play is Heilige Dankgesang, which is very appropriate for this situation. And I'm scared already of feeling how will that affect us somehow on stage, no? It's scary. And is there any work, I would like to kind of ask you, just this is the very, very last question. Is there any rare work of music that you would like to, because I think sometimes, that you would like to share with our audience and people that is listening to this thing, that it's not maybe part of like the canon, it's not Haydn, Brahms or Schubert or Beethoven, but something extraordinary, or a piece that you think is not heard enough, or a piece that somehow has accompanied you through this time, these days, of course, string quartet piece I'm talking, which is relevant for you?
I can begin. I have a suggestion. I think the confinement is very different depending on one's circumstances, of course. And so, although we're all, quote unquote, in the same situation, our actual situations at home are tremendously different. And I think there are some people who have all of a sudden tremendous amounts of time alone, and there are other people that now have no time alone. So my suggestion is more for people that aren't in a position where they're caring for other people, small or small younger children or older people that need to be cared for, but people that have more time than they ever did. I have a suggestion to listen to a piece that sadly isn't performed as often as it could be, but maybe could be a wonderful piece to reflect on this confinement and our sense of time and our changing perceptions of time. And that is Morton Feldman's Second String Quartet, which is a piece that I love. I love as much as I love any other piece. It can last anywhere between 5 and 6.5 hours, depending on the tempo of the quartet, uninterrupted. There are rests for each player, like there are rests in the Shostakovich quartet, but no more. And I think if I had that kind of time in this confinement, I would love to sit down in a quiet, not completely darkened room, but dimly lit room, and take in that piece in its entirety, as is now possible. Because I think it's something that it's a piece that changes our feeling of time and our experience of time. And I think this would be a wonderful opportunity to experience that.
Rainer, John?
Okay. It's a tricky question. It's sort of like, what's your favorite piece question?
No.
Or which Beethoven quartet would you take to your desert island, kind of thing. But I mean, our last concert was on March the 14th, so it was really quite late, and we didn't know if anyone was going to turn up to the concert. The audience was a very young audience, because they were maybe a bit more gung-ho than the older members of the audience. But we played the Sibelius Quartet, which is never played, and I don't actually recommend people listen to it at the moment, because it's incredibly dark, and unless you're really wanting to experience that sort of thing, but it's very dark and depressed and dismal. I mean, there is hope in it, but it's something we've been playing the last few months, and I really think it's quite an astonishing piece, and so it seemed a bit ominous playing that in our last concert. So I would go with that. But also maybe, I mean, our good friend Haydn is still a little bit of it doesn't always get his fair share, and there are so many Haydn quartets that are not known. We've just recorded the Opus 33s, and I mean, there's enough there to keep you going for 10 years of lockdown. And just to spend a bit of time with his warmth, with his joy, with his understanding of the human condition. And I think he would be a good person to come and sit next to us now and just put his hand on our shoulder and say, we'll be okay.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Rainer?
Yeah, I was really thinking about that, Cibrán, and of course I had a similar reaction, like John is like this typical man. For me, what had been important in the last weeks, and I would like to end here with a quote. It's a very famous musician, and maybe you or some know about this quote. So this person said, "I consider that music is, by its very nature, essentially powerless to express anything at all, whether a feeling, an attitude of mind, or psychological mood, a phenomenon of nature, etc. Expression has never been an inherent property of music. That is by no means the purpose of its existence." That was Stravinsky. And so many things we did, I guess all of us in the last weeks, if we were practicing or if we were studying music, was exactly the opposite direction, by the way. We were trying to find the meaning of music, because that keeps us alive, even though we don't hear the sounds. But we hear meaning in music, and we believe that music, as John was saying, is like Haydn. I completely agree. It's humane. It's about humanity and understanding the soul or the situation of us human beings so beautifully and tenderly and compassionate. And then this comes up, which we all dealt with. This is. It doesn't sound too strange to us, does it? From a certain kind of our education. So that I thought was really interesting, and I definitely keep that into the next weeks thinking about how this controversial approaches to music can happen at the same time.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think it's, unfortunately, because I would like keep talking with you here for ages and open possibly a bottle of wine and continue until very late, we have to leave it here. Everything in life has an end. So I really want to thank, first of all, everyone that has been listening. Thank you for popping in, tuning in, and listening to this little conversation. I hope it was somehow inspiring, and thanks of course to the Biennale, to String Quartet Biennale of Amsterdam, for hosting this crazy idea, and giving it its support. And of course, very dearly, thank you, John, thank you, Rana, and thank you, Jonathan, for joining, and for all your wonderful insights and inspiring thoughts and ideas. And I hope to see you soon on a stage and after the stage, having a glass of wine anywhere in Europe. So take care. Thank you very much for being here. Really, it's been wonderful to have you here. A really big privilege.
Thank you, Cibrán.
So
Thank you, Father.
bye bye.
you.
And for everyone, next week we will have another edition of these Ricercare at the same time, 7 o'clock, Wednesday the 3rd, and we will have with us Mark Steinberg from the Brentano Quartet, and Annette Walters from the Signum Quartet, and Ugo Ticciatti from the Umodern String Quartet that will be with us sharing some ideas and thoughts. So don't be there and share with us this fantastic experience. Thank you, everyone. Thanks again to John, Jonathan, and Rainer.